All right, y'all. So first and foremost, shout out to Jalopy because he had pointed something out that I really wanted to talk about and add some context to. Now, Jalopy had talked about a Vlad interview that he had did with academics and pointed out something that Vlad had said about Drake, implying that he kind of snitched on Drake in a way where he exposed some activity that happened in California back when Drake had property in Hidden Hills. They're saying that Vlad had exposed Drake, implying that he hid some type of suspicious activity when he stayed in Hidden Hills in California. The clip is what you hear right here.
I will say though, you know what I was impressed by? With all the shit and say not like us and everything people talking about Drake, not one chick even erroneously filed a lawsuit or like I thought there was gonna be a few of those to take advantage of the moment. And there's been not one person that's accused Drake of anything.
Yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised if some shit starts coming out. Because from what I understand, when Drake first moved to like Hidden Hills, like they were wilding out in that house. And him and his homies were doing some shit that probably got covered up somehow. You know what I'm saying? And now maybe people got paid. And
well, maybe they was partying. Not like.
I heard some stories, you know, but and I'm not going to mention them.
I was getting it in type shit.
I mean, some things could happen.
Maybe he's paying them off. Like,
I think Drake is just paying them off. And so, I mean, listen.
So I share that audio clip that Jalopy had showed us because it was implying that Vlad wouldn't be surprised if something occurred or something popped up around the time where Drake had owned this property. The funny thing is, and the reason why I want to talk about this so badly is because I've talked about that property multiple times when we gone over the Mark Hotel, Ebony Prince, Richard Fitzenwell, which was an alias at the hotel that Drake had stayed at. Like I said, Ebony Prince was a person that was able to get the items from Drake from the Mark Hotel. This was the alias that Drake had went by. He went by Mr. Richard Fitzenwell. This was an alias that Drake had used. But not only that, one thing that I also wanted to point out was that this was a LLC that Drake had owned as well. The jurisdiction of the LLC is currently in Texas, which is kind of funny because this is where some of his court dates have been happening at, specifically in Bexar County in San Antonio. And this is the alias that he goes by, right? Richard Fitzenwell. But this is the Richard Fitzenwell LLC. This is something that he had used to make a transaction. You can see the transaction that he had made was a property that he had sold for 11 million to Score 7 Property Trust. Now, Score 7 is a trust that is owned by Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford was the buyer of the property. Richard Fitzenwell is the seller. We could confirm this because Rams quarterback Matthew Stafford lists both LA homes he bought from rapper Drake again after snapping up 28 million for the mansion. The important part where we get 11 million from is this part right here. Drake's yellow compound. The couple purchased 2 neighboring ranch houses in April 2022. Records show they paid 5 million for one and 6 million for the other. In total, that's $11 million. That's how much Matthew Stafford had purchased it from Drake. When Ebony Prince exposed that he was the one that had the items from Drake when he had stayed at the Mark Hotel, when he exposed that Drake had went by this alias Richard Fitzenwell, when he exposed that he had incriminating information about Drake, he revealed this name, and this is when we looked up the name and saw what it was tied to. We could see that he had purchased and sold properties under this LLC. It just happens to be Matthew Stafford who had bought the property from him for 11 million. Interestingly, one of the properties, the cheaper of the two, was originally put on the market back in July, but the listing was removed a few months later. Now, though, it looks like the Staffords are finally ready to cash in on their investment, setting the price tags to 5 and 6 million. Respectively, the option is there for a buyer to snap on both of them. Take a look. So it looks like Matthew Stafford don't want anything to do with the houses now. I wonder why. I wonder if it has anything to do with what Vlad is saying in this interview with academics. I am curious to know if this is the reason why Matthew Stafford had sold the property. Does it have anything to do with the recent escapades of the previous owner, Mr. Richard Fitzenwell, aka Dick Fitzenwell, aka Drake? Did they realize they made a mistake buying the property? Because remember, this is the property that Vlad is saying that some suspicious activity had taken place, or at least activity that would come up in regards to the allegations that Drake is facing now, when Kendrick Lamar had Made Not Like Us with exaggerated hyperbole. Someone said right here, makes me wonder why it was already a creation agency, unless they didn't want the name out there and associated with Drake or for the websites to be found. It could be possible that Drake is choosing not to go through with this purchase under his name, so that way it could seem like he has nothing to do with the transaction. It's kind of similar like how he does with his lawsuits. Frozen Moments LLC is a LLC that Drake used in a lawsuit as well. So this is kind of like a thing that he does when he doesn't want to stamp his name. He'll use another LLC so that way his name isn't stamped in bold letters when you see who's filing what. Frozen Moments LLC was the person that filed the lawsuit, I think, with Spotify or iHeartRadio. I forgot one of the two. But it's one of the LLCs that he owns as well. And the same thing goes for the Richard Fitzenwell LLC. So all of this is coming back after this interview that was released 2 days ago. I am curious to know what Vlad knows. What does Matthew Stafford know? Why did Matthew Stafford leave the location that Drake used to own as well? Why did Drake sell it pretty cheap? I mean, I know it's expensive in the millions, but $11 million seems like a steal. And Matthew Stafford had jumped on it quickly, but it looks like he's not even selling it for a lot of money. If he's selling it for that amount, he's only asking for an extra million off the top, extra 2 million off the top, when these homes are worth way more than that. Another thing that I want to add, bro, I want to be clear that this was a time where Drake had called it the YOLO estate. That they called this Drake's party compound, under the impression that everybody already knew that Drake apparently throws big parties here, and this is usually what the location was known for. Drake throwing big parties, probably having a whole bunch of women over, women coming through to see Richard Fitzenwell and the property that he owns. The property is literally owned by a guy with the name Richard Fitzenwell. Really think about that really quick. And think about Ebony Prince exposing his name. That's the only reason why I knew about this property that he had sold, was because of Ebony Prince, the guy who exposed Drake for having the items for Meet the Grants, was able to tell us his name or alias that he went by in the hotel. So the property is basically owned by a guy named Richard Fitzenwell, and they're throwing parties at this compound where DJ Vlad is starting to say if anything were to come up, it would have to be something that came up around the time he had that place and threw all those parties at that YOLO house. Just an interesting thing that I wanted to add, and I wanted to shout out Jalopy for pointing this out, because I wanted to add the context to this location. I thought it would help explain why this was very important, why it was important that DJ Vlad had said this as well. But yeah, go follow Jalopy, man, and shout out for him for pointing this out. Y'all tell me how you feel about this, though, man. What do you think DJ Vlad meant by that? Y'all tell me how you feel in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video, man. Peace. Keep it alleged.